Today I wanted to talk to you about this bike. This video is going to be quite long. This isn't going to be a normal quick 4, 5, 7 minute review. I'm going to go in and talk about the 2017 KTM 300 XCW. We're going to talk about some changes between the 2017 2018. I'm going to give you my honest opinion on this bike compared to a couple others I've ridden. We're also going to talk about why I didn't wait for the TPI and the advantages and disadvantages of the TPI and the carburetor. So today's going to be kind of interesting. Like I said, this isn't going to be a short review. This is going to be kind of a long one. So get ready. Alright, so I'm going to go through a couple things real quick right here. I'll give you a quick walk around and then we're going to hit the trail. So I bought this bike back, probably about 5 months ago, and I've been riding it pretty hard ever since. It was actually a culture shock because this was my first two-stroke, 300 two-stroke. I had a 125, YZ125 beforehand, and it was a blast. It's an extremely nimble bike, but it didn't have the power and torque of this one. And we'll get into that in a little bit later. There are a couple things I dislike about this bike. One being this gas cap. This gas cap is just absolutely retarded. It's a little push button here. You push this button down and it doesn't want to operate quite right all the time. In theory, it would be a really good design, but the way this push button actually works, it's just, it doesn't. It doesn't work. So, yeah. I've dropped this bike a couple times. Bent the two-stroke pipe, all the crap, and that's one thing I would recommend is some serious pipe protection, because this thing is just, it's I guess an inherent design issue with the two-stroke, the way the flow acoustics have to go through the exhaust to get it to run right. But the first thing I would suggest is getting you some kind of bash plate that protects that pipe, because that pipe's not cheap, and just in the 5 months I need a new pipe already. So let's go ahead and take this thing for a rip. You know what's interesting? My favorite thing about this bike, aside from the 300 power and the suspension, is that this is just amazing. It's the greatest thing in the world. Why didn't all the other two-strokes in the past come with these? It's like a godsend. I love it. Absolutely love it. I've just fallen in absolute love with this bike. Like I said, I've ridden many bikes before, and I cannot get over this thing. I think about this bike day in and day out, non-stop. I'll be home sleeping and wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about this thing. And it's really interesting because I've been riding for a while and no bike has ever really inspired me like that. It's just something about it, you know? Alright, had to get that quick crap out of the way real quick. So I don't know if how many of you have picked up yet, but under partial throttle you could hear the engine being kind of like blubbery a little bit. That's one of the main changes for 2018. They changed the intake 7 degrees. They flattened it out 7 degrees, and they changed jets inside this CARB. It's for the 2018 model, that kind of blubbery partial throttle has definitely been improved. The thing about that though is pretty much everybody that buys one of these bikes is going to change the jettings anyways. I'm going to get a JD jet kit for 80 bucks and that'll take care of all the issues anyways. So I'm not really worried about that too much. And yes, the TPI would take care of a lot of that runnability issue. So that leads me to my next thought. Why I didn't actually wait for the TPI. Well, the biggest reason here is I live in America, and in the States here, we don't see the 300 TPI this year or probably even next, as far as I know. I wanted the 300cc two-stroke, and they didn't offer it, so that's the biggest reason. Now there are other reasons which I'll talk about here Interestingly enough, the TPI version of this is actually a BRP design. It's been in production for several years now. It's a technology that they've used on their two-stroke snowmobiles. And KTM actually has, KTM Husky, they actually have a contract with BRP. So theoretically, the design should be of sound, you know, it should be really good. However, this is the first year of it, and I'm sure there's going to be teething problems. And to be honest with you, I honestly don't feel like being a guinea pig for KTM and Husky. We'll talk more about the advantages and the disadvantages of the TPI later on in this video. Alright, so we're going to go hit this power line trail, and you know, it's just going to be a fire trail, but it'll give me a chance to give you guys a little bit more in depth on this bike. You know, one thing I haven't talked about yet is the suspension and the brakes and a reliability aspect of this bike. He's on a WR250R, which is registered and road legal. This bike, I actually converted it to road legal. I got a video on that, but I'll give you the basics of it. Basically, I had insurance prior to going to the DMV to register this bike. I went up to the DMV and I went up to the counter, told the lady, I need to register my motorcycle. And that was the key word there. I didn't say dual sport. I didn't say dual sport, dirt bike, enduro, motocross bike. I didn't say anything. I said I just bought this bike from the dealer a couple days ago, and they didn't do the registration part of it. She's like, oh, okay, well, let me see what you got. So I handed her the insurance and the dealer paperwork, and she just did her thing. I had to fill out a couple lines on a piece of paper, handed it back into her, and walked out with my tags. So it is possible in the States to get these bikes street legal. Oh, new section. I've never been this route before, so this will be good. Good, I won't feel so bad about leaving this portion of the video raw. I think I've said this probably 20 times, and aside from the power difference of this bike, there's a noticeable weight difference. Out of all the bikes I've ridden, this bike weighs 220, 225, somewhere around there. Probably 235, 237 with fuel in it. You know, all of the bikes I'd previously ridden were either dual sports or motocross bikes, 4-strokes that were, you know, 270 was the lightest bike, 265, 270 was the lightest bike I've ridden. Coming from those bikes into the power and weight of this bike has just been an absolute blast. I feel like I'm riding a mountain bike, a bicycle, if you will. Hold on, make sure you're clear. Compared to the bikes I had previously ridden, this thing is so freaking agile. It's like a little mountain goat. Now, compared to the other 2-strokes, the 250, 300 2-strokes, this is right about the same weight, right about the same power. So it's really not much in it. Let's say a Beta 300 2-stroke and a KTM 300 2-stroke. I think the KTM may have a tad bit more power. The suspension, we need to talk about that. It's tall. This is a very tall bike. The tallest I've ever ridden, of course. But the suspension is so plush. I'm gonna try to describe how plush this thing is. It's like perfect. It's literally like a cloud of air, just, you know, it's just, it's so good. Again, if you notice just back there, when the wheel came up and came back down, the suspension works incredibly well. See, it just gives you so much confidence to go over things that you would think would just throw you right off the front of this bike. You don't notice a difference until you ride one of these enduro bikes, the suspension, the difference in them, and how good they actually are. And I didn't. Now the brakes on this bike, I can't really comment too much on, because brakes are generally dependent on how well that you can actually put it down to the ground. So for instance, if I hit the brakes really hard right now, how well is the tire going to grab into the... Oh, this is going to be tricky. Oh yeah. Anyways, if you don't have a good tire on the bike, how can you stop the bike? And if the suspension isn't working properly to keep the wheel on the ground so that the tire can contact everything, oh nice, nice. Now with that said, they do work exceptionally well. Like I said, I don't know how much of that is the brakes and how much of that is the suspension and the tires working together. Going back to the tires, previously I ran tubeless, T-U-B-L-I-S-S, I can't spell, in my DRZ 400, and it was amazing. It made one hell of a difference. And I had tubeless ready to go on this bike when I bought it, and these tires did such a good job at laying it down that I haven't really needed it yet, but I know for a fact it would be an improvement. I love that two-stroke rip, man. Just being on the pipe is just absolutely fantastic. I suppose now is as good as time any is to talk to you guys about the torque of the 300 two-stroke. So I come from 4-strokes generally, and that's one thing I do like about my 4-strokes is they do have torque. Now my YZ125 had no torque whatsoever, even with flywheel weights. And that also brings me back to one of the reasons why I wanted to get this bike over the 250. This bike has way more torque than the 250 TPI. There's no replacement for displacement. Yeah, and you're setting a good pace. I was just like, you're probably one of the best WR250R riders on YouTube.
Fucking hey, man. Thanks, buddy.
No, you really are, dude. You fly.
Try, man. I'd like to ride with those, like Tim Hollis and those guys. Those guys talk a big game with WRs. I'd like to give them a run for their money.
There you go. You probably would too, no doubt. You probably would. Alright, we're gonna get back on it. I believe I was talking about the torque. So believe it or not, this bike feels like it has the same amount of torque as my 400 4-stroke. And people just, when I say that, a lot of people don't believe me. They just don't look. I think that's 4th, 5th. See, it just pulls. This is like right off idle. See, it's a rocket. People just don't believe me when I say they don't understand the amount of pull on these handlebars this thing actually has. I mean, it actually wears me out. Alright, back to that whole carburetor and TPI thing. Do I personally believe that TPI will be the savior of the two-stroke, with the EPA being as evil as they are with the regulations and stuff? Oh yeah, I do. I believe fuel injection and two-stroke is the future, and it will save two-strokes. So don't get the wrong idea just yet. However, I'm kind of a simple guy. Mechanically wise, I like things simple. Bikes have been carbureted since they were born. They're not as efficient, but they work. They've come so far nowadays. I'll guarantee you some of the original fuel-injected dirt bikes don't even run as well as this carbureted bike does. The simplicity in them, you got a metering device, which is normally a needle, and fuel goes downhill. Gravity-fed fuel. You know, like, how simple does it get? For a carburetor not to work, you know, mechanically speaking, if the needle breaks, which how is that going to happen? If the needle gets clogged, well, that's your own fault. Or if gravity stopped working, you wouldn't get fuel flow. Now, with a fuel injected bike, especially with the 250 and 300 TPIs, the way they have it set up, I think they have, oh, prickers. There we go. They have what, six or so sensors that tell the computer when to inject it, the mix percentage. It has a fuel pump. They have to have higher pressures because of the transfer port injection. That's a lot of crap that can go wrong when I'm out here riding. I'm probably 5 miles from my pickup truck, but that's 5 miles I'd have to walk if something were to go wrong. And I'm lazy. I don't like walking, which is why I'm not a mountain biker or a walker. I ride a motorized vehicle. So I can't bang on enough about how simple the design is and why I think the carburetors are better at this current moment. Now in the future, I'm sure with technology, just like anything, reliability increases over time. You know, when the design has been proven and tested to work on these bikes after year competition, then I'll definitely root for it, and I will be trading this model in for a TPI model, but just not yet. I forgot to talk about reliability. I honestly haven't had this bike long enough to give you a long term. I really can't comment on long term how reliable this thing is. I can tell you I do have a hard start issue when it's cold and I haven't ridden a bike in a while. When the bowl's dry, I have to crank it for a lot longer than I normally would, but it still fires every time. It doesn't just crank for day on end and then kill the battery. Yeah! Well, I think that's going to be the end of this video. Like I said, there's probably some things that I'm missing right now, and I may have edited a few things in, so please forgive me for that. But when you're out riding and trying to concentrate on riding at any kind of, you know, pace, it's kind of hard to remember all that stuff that you were gonna say. I forgot to mention that we got some really cool trail coming up, actually. Even though it's off season, everything's dead, we got some really cool stuff planned. Some mountain single track and some hair scramblers within the next couple months. So stay tuned for that. I will catch y'all later. Peace.